Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to still be covering the activities of COP27 conference, the summit that is taking place in the Red Sea Resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. And in today's episode, we're going to be looking at the participation of the civil societies in the summit. Now, we've seen governments, we've seen world leaders, we've seen heads and CEOs of multinationals, but there's also a voice for the civil societies and the NGOs. We're going to be taking a closer look at the role they play in the summit. But before we start doing that, let's check out some of the main stories making the news today. And we'll start off with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who received a phone call from the Brazilian President-elect Lula da Silva on Tuesday. Presidential spokesman Bassem Radi said that during their telephone conversation, da Silva thanked President Sisi for congratulating him on his winning of the presidency, expressing his appreciation to President Sisi in Egypt. The Brazilian leader hailed the close and strategic ties that bind the two countries and praised Egypt's achievements in the past few years concerning its economic reform and realizing a comprehensive development. He asserted that he was keen to attend the COP27 conference after receiving an invitation from President Sisi. Da Silva further said he was looking forward to expanding ties and cooperating with Egypt in various domains, especially at the economic and trade levels. For his part, President Sisi welcomed da Silva's participation in the COP27 conference and wished Brazil prosperity and progress. The head of state expressed Egypt's appreciation to distinguished relations with Brazil, especially its outstanding developmental experience that had a positive economic impact. The president said Egypt is looking forward to activating the frameworks of cooperation with Brazil in all fields, especially the trade and economy. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi also directed efforts should be enhanced to complete the developmental projects in the east of Alexandria according to the highest international standards. He also said these development projects are linked to the development currently underway in the network of traffic and main roads and axes surrounding the city of Alexandria, which help alleviate pressure on the neighborhoods on the eastern and central parts of the city. This came during President Sisi's meeting with Lieutenant General Ahmed Khalid, commander of the Strategic Command and supervisor of the military industrialization, as well as Major General Hisham Swefi, head of the Engineering Authority of the Armed Forces, to review the latest developments in the East Alexandria region within the Integrated Development Plan of Alexandria Governorate. Special regards were given to the establishment of the new city of Abu Qir, which is the first Egyptian city to be built entirely within an artificial island in the Mediterranean, with the aim of creating an establishment and investment and commercial hub city. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry said the energy sector is one of the economic sector's largest contributors of carbon emissions. Now, he said this justifies the need for investment in new energy fields that should be clean, low cost and sustainable in order to support efforts to decrease the repercussions of climate change and green economy transition. Speaking at the session on Tuesday, dubbed Energy Day, Shoukry said transition to green energy has become not only a necessity to face climate change, but also an economic choice full of benefits given the current geopolitical circumstances and the ensuing global energy crisis. Shoukry said it is necessary that transition to new energy resources is just, which means taking into consideration social and economic circumstances in developing nations, among them the African countries. He said Africa's developing nations are short of clean and affordable clean energy for their peoples, despite their tremendous potentials in renewable energy production. The UN Climate Change Conference Summit, the COP27, resumed and continued its activities today in Sharm el-Sheikh. The day's activities are being held under the dedicated energy issues. Energy Day aims to review fair transition to energy in Africa and energy security in light of the current crises. It also focuses on finding innovative and technological solutions and laying down green hydrogen policies. Mechanisms for activating green economies and financing transition to clean energy also top the agenda of Energy Day. Today's COP27 sessions are also entitled the Civil Society Day, as climate action needs the participation of all parties, stressing the importance of the civil society as a partner in global efforts to combat climate change. The Civil Society Day aims to involve the civil society in the agenda of international work to face the climate change and guarantee merging points of view, in addition to activate an active communication and development of partnership chances. And on the sidelines of the COP27 summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, Now TV's correspondent Monam Silhi conducted an interview with Frans Timmermans, the Vice President of the European Union Commission.
إنني وإذ أتطلع إلى استقبالكم من قمة المناخ 27 التي تستضيفها مصر في شرم الشيخ.
Right, Mr. Timmermans, let me hear a take from what you've just said here. And you said that you are reducing your dependency on the Russian gas from 40 to 10%. And here in Egypt, we are working on the green hydrogen, the LNG, the gas, and all this. What kind of opportunities do you see with Egypt, particularly that we are speaking about huge capacities, huge, but funds? So,
well, you know, we have to create the right circumstances so that private companies want to invest in Egypt in this energy transition. I think we're getting there very quickly now. You know, there's plans for a cable for electricity between Egypt and Greece. There's plans for us to use LNG terminals in Greece for exporting LNG to the European Union, but especially the energy transition. If Greece moves even, if Egypt moves even faster in terms of solar and wind power, it will mean that there's be more electricity on the basis of renewables, so less electricity made with gas. This gas can then be used for other purposes, for instance, exporting it to countries who need that gas. And that will lead to more income also for Egypt, income that can be invested in the country, in the industry, in developing the renewable industry. So I only see limitless possibilities here for Egypt. Egypt can be a hub. Egypt can be a producer of hydrogen in the future. You have the space, you have the sun, you have the wind, you know, it's an ideal place to, and you have the proximity to big markets in Europe that will be needing this hydrogen. So I think it's the business case that writes itself.
It's the world's most witnessed event. The Mother of the World invites you to confront together the climate crisis. Efforts united in fulfilling global goals. Solutions for the world's most pressing challenges. COP27, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, 2022.
Thank you, Mona. These were some of the main stories making the news today, but now turning our attention to the Civil Society Day, looking at the important role played by the civil societies and NGOs, not just the whole world, but also especially in Egypt. Let's take a look at this report and we'll be right back.
World leaders must listen to civil society on the climate crisis. There has to be inclusive climate decision-making spaces, and world leaders has to listen to civil society calls on climate change issues. The role of civil society in demanding accountability on climate action is indispensable, yet not everyone's voice is heard. Climate justice will only be achieved when people from countries most affected by climate crisis are at the front and center of any discussions. Addressing the issues caused by climate change is very complicated. People and communities have been witnessing the growing problems over years. World leaders must listen to civil society on the climate crisis. There has to be inclusive climate decision-making spaces, and world leaders has to listen to civil society calls on climate change issues. The role of civil society in demanding accountability on climate action is indispensable, yet not everyone's voice is heard. Climate justice will only be achieved when people from countries most affected by climate crisis are at the front and center of any discussions. Addressing the issues caused by climate change is very complicated. People and communities have been witnessing the growing problems over years. But most of that changed this year due to COP27. Lots of environmental activities took place and accreditations were provided to environmental NGOs by the government, enabling them to become active. However, climate funding is too often given prescriptive mandates by international organizations without an understanding of local context. They need to listen to the people who are the ones actually doing the work. Effective climate action requires all stakeholders to participate, whether this be youth, NGOs or shareholders of large financial institutions. It is important that all stakeholders find space at the negotiating table. Discover the meaning and scope of the main topic of November 15th, COP27, Action for Climate Empowerment and Civil Society Day, through the lens of CMCC activities and contributions to the topic. The COP27 thematic day dedicated to action for climate empowerment and civil society aims to integrate civil society into decision-making processes, building on the momentum of COP26 and so the establishment of the Glasgow Work Programme on Action for Climate Empowerment. But what exactly is ACE? ACE is a term adopted by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in reference to the goal of empowering all members of society to engage in climate action through education, training, public awareness, public participation, public access to information, and international cooperation.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're joined here tonight in the studio by Dr. Batran, the former chair of the Telecommunications Committee in the Egyptian Parliament and the foresight expert. Dr. Batran, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Batran, now looking at the activities and the sessions taking place at COP27 today, it is considered a civil society day. There's been a lot of focus on the role being played by the civil societies, the NGOs, in this summit. We've seen multinationals, we've seen world leaders and prime ministers from all over the world. But it is essential to have the civil societies and the NGOs as the voice of the communities, or maybe the conscience of the communities, really knocking on the decision makers' doors. How important is the role of the civil society and the NGOs in such an important summit?
Well, I'm glad you raised this up. The COP, it's a convention and a conference of the parties, of all stakeholders. It's where everybody comes together to move things forward. I remember attending a COP back in 2006, and it was the first time the civil societies were part of that COP. It was a conference of the parties in Turkey. I don't remember its number though, but so that was the first time CSOs, civil society organizations, were part of the COP. Our president keeps always saying man is together. So the togetherness of action is very important.
Yes.
If you take a decision by yourself and you don't engage me, so I will be always dissociated and you will never have the right support. But the fact that civil society is wrapping up the days of the, we still have a day, I believe, before, so it's tomorrow and then Thursday, but it's wrapping up most of the work. So it's getting the engagement of the civil society, the voice of technically the people. So it's not the executives, it's not the business community, it's not the politicians, not the decision makers, but they're the people that will have a lot of the implementation part to do. Implementation in terms of getting people involved, introducing the topics, awareness, what's going on, how can we, the people, help push this forward and protect our world and our environment? How can we, the people, benefit from the products of the decisions that have been made, from the job opportunities that will open, of the intellectual and scientific work that is opening up for we, the people, on a broad range of levels. We, the students, we, the teachers, we, the scientists, we, the workers, the job seekers, the youth. So it's everybody's involvement, and this is the link. The CSOs, the civil society organizations, are actually the link between all that has happened and the societies, the communities, and the world.
Yes. Dr. Batran, now, you've mentioned, like, in 2006, when you attended the COP summit, it was the first time for the civil society organizations to participate at the summit, at the COP. Now, for instance, this summit, what sort of topics do the activists, the environmentalists, the NGOs, the civil societies, what topics do they raise? What do they want mainly from the world leaders, the politicians, the businesses, the businessmen, the decision makers? What are the main topics they're talking about and raising at an international summit?
First of all, it's things have become segregated in a way. So we're talking about women, we're talking about youth, we're talking about the environment in general, recycling, we're talking about job opportunities, we're talking, so it's really being aware, including us. We're talking about special needs and so the collection of the people, the collection of what the society is all about, whether we're talking about the large numbers and populace of societies or the minority groups. So every minority group has an aspect of things. This is generally, so we've seen in the Women's Day and how, so it's women of the world, women in general, and then women of Egypt and the women of Africa, because now we're talking Egypt has taken a huge initiative for implementing COP and COP mandates through African countries. And you've seen President Biden come over, pledge some of the money, I believe $150 million, through the COP mandate, through Egypt to Africa. Our president has created a mandate for women in Africa via the Egyptian civil society and via the National Council of Women as well. So I'm just giving this as an example. It is a general topic that is narrowing through a certain channel via civil society. So it's the environment through women, through the Egyptian civil society organizations towards Africa. So that is what they keep. So everybody has their interest group.
Yes. Well, I mean, talking about Egypt in specific, we have about 500 NGOs really participating in the summit under the title Our Country is Hosting COP27. Now, before we start talking about submitting some sort of solutions or trying to convince or really work on the politicians and the decision makers implementing these decisions, one of the main steps and concerns for the civil societies is raising the awareness of the communities, of the people. How essential is it to raise the awareness and introduce the culture of combating climate change, rationalizing the water resources, dealing with recycling, as you've mentioned, all these things?
I'll tell you something. This is a COP of action, of implementation. It's not, we are not on that level, not on a societal level, but this COP level of leaders, the number of leaders. And I have to emphasize, besides the fact that it's a COP of implementation, that the numbers of people attending this COP, nearly 50,000 people registered in the COP. So you're talking about a huge number, and this is unheard of for COP. The last COP, the people who registered were 35,000. So you're talking about quite a sizable increase of numbers. You're talking about a large number of, like you mentioned, NGOs participating. So this gives you a very interesting and strong message that the Egyptian society as a whole, and civil society in particular, is capable of adopting the mandates of COP, of the environment, and taking it and dissipating it into the society via awareness, like you're mentioning, via educational routes, via programs for all sorts of sectors. So it's not the awareness for gentlemen or for ladies or for youth or for, it's the awareness within the society for young people all the way to the society as a whole. So it's a family awareness, the family of Egypt, if you will.
Yes.
So this is a very important message. We are a COP of implementation. We are a COP, and the implementation, a main arm of implementation is the civil society. You are using civil society to include programs of awareness and of a recycling program, an energy saving program, a huge project of energy saving. You're talking about BIMBAN. BIMBAN is the fourth largest in the world solar project in the world of its kind, and the engagement of the society, of the Aswan society surrounding the area, was very important to recruit the workers, to recruit people, and then adopting via Haya Karima the solar panels into the various villages. So you're talking about a whole system. Yes, we are creating energy, clean energy from solar panels in a huge, large project, and we as the young people of the area are working within the project, and then back home, being part of the Haya Karima program or village, our also home is also using a solar panel. So you're talking about a very interesting way of implementation. I'm doing it, I'm adopting it at home. So it's like you preach what you do what you preach. It's not only it's really an integrated way. And the message that Egypt is giving, not only of its leadership and the endorsement of the Egyptian leadership to the COP and to the mandate of the COP, to the climate and all the different aspects of the climate through NWAFI program, through the energy, through agriculture, through water, through. But it's also all the society of the Egyptian people having their say within COP as civil society and as youth. Youth is part of the civil society, but youth consider it also an entity by themselves, because for us in Egypt they're over 60%, as you know. So this is all, it's the whole society toward making a change. And I have to wrap this your question by saying that Egypt is really one of the countries that started adopting the COP mandate a little bit early on. When you see what happened in the electricity sector in Egypt in the last 8 years, and you know that today, first, we don't have coal, which is a major problem in many, many countries around the world. We don't use coal. We don't have coal mines in the sort that we hear about in the world. So this is something to be proud of. We are using, and 20% of our energy as we speak now is already renewable from solar, wind, and water. So you're talking about clean energy already in Egypt, and Egypt is piloting a huge project in green hydrogen. So that's a further addition. And in our strategy, we are planning to be 50% renewable by the year 2030, and by the year 2050 to have zero carbon emissions. And we are not going to go there. We are already 1/4 of the way there already.
Yes.
Okay, so you're talking about we have done, we are doing, and we will do more.
Yes. Yes, we are probably, along with the other African countries, paying the highest price for global warming and climate change. Now, you've mentioned that COP27 is a summit of implementation. So the next step for the civil societies and the activists, taking it one step further than the marches, the campaigns,
there
and all
were
this.
Several, many,
yes, but how can these civil societies and the NGOs really work on the decision makers and force them to implement the pledges and the promises?
No, they don't need to force. They need to work together. We're beyond the forcing stage, and this is the message. This is the message happening in Egypt today. It's not about forcing. It's not about convincing you of adopting the rights of the climate and the environment and women and so on. It's working together and finding solutions to reach higher results. So the leadership is there, the business community is there, the government is there in Egypt and in many countries around the world today, what we've seen in the COP. And so all of the components are there. It's the thing is, so we all see the road, we all see where we want to go, and we agree on it. It's just a question of how fast, or how can we work together better, or how can we integrate a few programs here and there. The president of Barbados mentioned something fantastic in COP in the speech. The president said the country that has built the pyramids can definitely find solutions for the environment, and I really liked what was said. So it's really we can, yes we can, we are. And we can push forward. If my part is about awareness, I'll do awareness. If my part is about implementation of small panels within houses, I will do my part. If my part is creating a program and giving and creating a program in schools, so civil societies can produce now a program of full educational program, and they can push private schools and public schools and give sessions for environmental programs and syllabus to be introduced within the schools. And when you think schools, why do you start with schools? Why not nurseries? Why not preschools? And why don't you start informing the young children? And you know that we have a law for the preschool nurseries as well, with the social solidarity ministry. So this all is integrated together and will integrate further and will work together further to produce the results required of the COP. So also our Ministry of International Cooperation wanted to make sure that we have $15 billion after the COP. We managed to secure 7.5. So we are actually halfway through in the financing portion. Part of it are a minor part, not the major one, are grants, and another part is long-term loans for enhancing the business community. It has to be business,
Yes, yes.
but the civil society falls in place as well to get the results required. So the really the road is paved.
Yes.
It's a question of how fast, how passionate we all are about it. And then the environment, also civil society, is very important, because in the COP it was mentioned the supply chain issues happening not only because of the environment, but because of the crisis in Europe.
Yes.
And this also is a responsibility, is giving the right message for the people in the various regions of Egypt and the various countries of the world. It's all civil society. Talk to the people, say, I've heard it being mentioned, not only by our politicians, but the politicians of so-and-so country as well. That was a surprise for me, that they have the same problem, or that they have a worse problem. They have actually seen, and seeing is better than witnessing the actual situation. So dissipating and giving the information that they have seen, looking and seeing how the leaders work together and talk together and listen to each other, and the messages given about what's happening in the world, is also a responsibility for civil society to give the message to the people, saying we have reached so far. The agriculture and civil society, why are we not having the irrigation of rice as we used to by, they just flood by flooding in the fields, because we need to conserve water, not only for political reasons, but for environmental reasons and for water reasons as well. So it's an integrated thing that the messages are giving via the civil society responsible for the agricultural and farming sectors, to give the message that it is not only, but also.
Yes.
Not only because of our Nile issue, but also because of the environment, but also because it's a world problem. So we need to educate our children. We need to work together to find better solutions, to have our rice with less amount of water, and maybe with a lesser amount of water have more crop as well, more rice, more wheat, and so on.
Well, Dr. Batran, if we're all pushing together in the same direction, you've mentioned the financing, the funding, we're halfway there with 7.5. Now, what if countries, even though they are pushing forward and make the pledges, they're not moving, as you've mentioned, maybe fast enough, or even if they are working, maybe things are not meeting the highest international standards required for the developmental initiatives and projects? How can we hold them accountable? How can we empower the civil societies in order to hold them accountable? Put the blame on someone who's not doing their job, who are not keeping their promises.
Keeping their voices, getting the right message and putting it via the correct right ways. President Macron said that Europe is paying its dues. It's other countries that were not paying their dues. President Biden, when he said we were out of the Paris Agreement and then we're back in the Paris Agreement. So the largest polluters of the world were not pledging as much as they should have, or not really following through with their pledges once done. This was an issue before, and an issue that also is taken very positively for Egypt in this COP, the COP of implementation, is that it got the risks or a mitigation article of all countries that have helped or contributed in the pollution, in the carbon emissions that we have today, have to be held accountable. So the accountability of the countries of origin is a topic mentioned, is an article mentioned within the schedule. And this is, for the topic, is unheard of. So we're not only talking about implementation, but about accountability. So now you are accountable, you're not just giving the pledge because you want to, it's more in the area of you have to. You have to be accountable for your actions and responsibility as a responsible country. Yes, you have created, and then you have created wealth, true, but you have to be accountable for the repercussions of the wealth created on other countries, more vulnerable countries. So it's really an integrated thing. Egypt is really pushing hard, and Egypt, with also its massive message to the world in peace and bringing the parties together, it's also not only Egypt as a country of leadership helping to bring peace and eventually prosperity to the world, but this also has a responsibility of civil society to give this message. Our country is strong, is strategically positioned to help not only preserve the environment that we live in terms of air, water, energy, and so on, but also preserving the environment and the global world, world peace, preserving and maintain and reinstitution world peace by having an initiative. So we're strategically well placed to do that in front of all those leaders of the world present, and they endorse the Egyptian message of peace to bring Russia and Ukraine together. And this is another responsibility on, I don't want to say on a political level, but on a social level, to say you belong to a country that has a responsibility to the world, and we as people, we have to have a responsibility to our smaller communities, smaller families. So if each of us do their responsibility, like Egypt has done to the world, Egypt has done to the environment, Egypt has done to its people, then we the people have to do towards ourselves, our families, our communities. So it's really a message of hope.
Yes.
Of hope.
Well, one final question, because we are running out of time now. There is a role and sort of cooperation between the civil societies and the NGOs with the private sector and the public sector. You've mentioned that the NGOs, maybe they fall under the business sector. Now, what should be strengthened or addressed more? The relationship between the civil society, the NGOs, with the private sector or the public sector?
Both, but the private sector is an easier way of implementing. With the private sector, you need laws and regulations and so on. With the private sector, I joined the Global Compact in 2005. I made the pledge to Kofi Annan personally, and I've adopted the mandate ever since. The thing is, and what I've learned through this learning journey and responsibility journey, if you will, is that you pledge not only money or effort, but you pledge as a private sector, you pledge what you are strongest in.
Yes.
So if I work in education, I have to pledge education back. To vulnerable groups, to women, to youth, to children, and so on. If I am doing foodstuffs, I have to pledge foodstuff back. And the relationship and the communication between a company. So the company has two routes of action. One is to cooperate with an NGO, with a civil society, and via this pledge create its responsibility, or create its own NGO.
Yes.
There is always, the ultimate NGO has to be there, whether it's the business communities, NGOs being created,
or the public,
or the civil society already there, having protocols of cooperation to push things forward. Because if I do business, I cannot do people.
Yes.
So people's business is the NGO.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Batran has mentioned, a big role to be played by the civil societies and the NGOs. We're happy to announce that we have 500 NGOs participating, Egyptian NGOs participating in this summit. Definitely big rooms for cooperating with the private sector and the public sector as well. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Meir Batran, the former chair of the Telecommunications Committee of the Egyptian Parliament and the foresight expert. Dr. Batran, always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much, Doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on our international. Pardon, I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.